When we celebrate the beginning of a new year, we celebrate the rebirth of time. We wait for God to do new things. We wait for who we are. We wait for the coming of grace, for the revelation of God. We wait for the truth. We wait for the vision of the whole. But we cannot just wait. We must pray. We must pray. That call to action and all that I just shared came to me at the beginning of this new year of 2021 in a daily meditation email that I received from Richard Rohr and his Center for Action and Contemplation. We must pray. And unity certainly supports those words, given that our entire movement was founded on prayer and that we have one of the largest and oldest prayer ministries in the world, that of Silent Unity, a prayer ministry that serves literally millions of people throughout this world of every faith tradition, some with no faith tradition, but with every prayer being given reverence as it is received. In an article about prayer that I was reading on Unity World Headquarters website, the idea was put forth that we instinctively turn to prayer. Instinctively turn to prayer. That reference was used as the article said that was true in times of challenge, times when life circumstances can feel very overwhelming to us. And personally, I'd like to consider not limiting that instinctiveness to challenges. I'd like to think that we would also want to prayerfully respond in the very same way in those times that are filled with joy and contentment and fulfillment in life. And I say that because of how the article described why this instinct is present. It said there is something comforting about taking time out to commune with a higher power. That there is something about those special moments of conscious awareness of spirit. There's something about our rising into that spiritual level and then thinking and feeling and speaking and acting from that place. That when we pray, when we have those sacred moments of connection with spirit, they're moments that can then translate into things such as greater strength as we then move forward in our lives, or those moments that translate into filling our hearts with joy and gladness in those happy times, and also be able to surround us in the energies of peace and comfort in the sorrowful times. Today, we're going to take Richard's words, "We must pray," to heart. We're going to take a look at what underlies prayer as it's viewed by Unity. And we're going to see how that together may help us to instinctively turn to prayer more often. And so what is prayer? What is prayer? There are likely a whole lot of different answers that we could come up with, to that question. And each one of them would be valid, even if it was only the perspective of one person. And that concept is probably going to apply to just about anything that I will offer today. So I'll just let you know up front that I'm going to speak to prayer in the primary ways that Unity speaks to it and teaches it, while at the same time acknowledging, as Unity also does, that prayer is defined and practiced and acknowledged in a whole bunch of different ways, and that everyone is blessed in finding the reason, the purpose, the way, or the ways that work best for them. Now, one way to speak about how Unity would define prayer would be to think about, making a very short journey, that one that is from our head into our hearts, or perhaps into our souls. In other words, when we hold a definition of prayer in our heads, that's exactly and all it is. It is a collection of words about another word that's just sitting in our heads, and there's no action behind it. Whereas to view prayer from the heart level, from the soul level, is to see prayer as any conscious attempt to experience the presence of God. Any conscious attempt to experience the presence of God. It is a deliberate attempt to seek out and connect with that oneness that we share with spirit. And you were all given the opportunity to do just that today already in our service. I like to try to be deliberate in offering that opportunity to you every single time we gather together. Because every week when we come together and we step into the beginning of our service, we offer what I have come to refer to as a statement of unity. It is a statement of positive affirmation that more often than not is our first entry point into the theme for that particular Sunday. And what is it that you hear me say in preparing to take that step forward into that space? What you hear me say is that I invite you to make that intentional connection with spirit in you. And from the truth that that spirit resides in every single person, now extend that connection out to those that are gathered with you today. What I'm asking you to do in that moment is to become present to the moment, to bring your conscious awareness to God's presence in you, Spirit's presence in everyone, and to be intentional, to be deliberate in making that connection with that presence as we begin our celebration service. The words that we're going to say next are just that. They're next. The first prayer, the first act of prayer that we experience every single Sunday is our individual and our collective desire, intention, instinct to connect with Spirit. So what's significant about that way of viewing prayer? What makes it perhaps a little bit different than other ways we might define prayer, other ways we may practice prayer? When our first prayer and the only prayer is simply going to God first, what that tells me is that there's nothing else in our minds. There's nothing else in our hearts. There are no earthly needs present whatsoever. No new car, no bigger house, no better job, no healed relationships, just a desire to experience God. Our co-founder Charles Fillmore once said that the real search of all people is for God. They may think they are looking for other things, but they must eventually admit that it is God they seek. Now, that does not mean that the human needs that we all have at different times in our lives do not exist, that they don't matter, that they're not important. They absolutely are. However, putting God first in prayer is the way through which we are then inspired and guided as to ways and means through which to meet those needs, whether they are for ourselves or for someone else. And here's a wonderful example of that. Some of you were already talking about this before our service began. Last Sunday, in our time of fellowship, there was a lot of wonderful discussion taking place about how we could continue supporting our fellow congregants, Nick and Sharon Chapel, as Nick continues to move through a very serious health challenge. And at one point, a question was asked as to whether a hospital bed could be purchased in order to eliminate the monthly expenses that were being incurred by the chapels. Well, not 48 hours later, I got an email from our Brenda here who advised that a bed had been found. And then on just this past Friday morning, I had another email, one of the first ones I saw when I logged on Friday morning, another one from Brenda advising that the bed was now going to be delivered later that day. The conversation of the need took place after having spent an hour in prayer, offered in various forms. And what were Brenda's last words in her email Friday morning? They were a simple request. All she said was prayers, 10:30 today. At 11:46 on Friday, another email came through to me from Brenda, and it said, mission accomplished. And her last words in that email, thanks for the prayers. It's a perfect example of how once we acknowledge God, seek out that experience of God, it lifts us, and then it begins to speak and think and feel and act as us. So that brings us to what Unity teaches as being the primary purpose for prayer. And it's not about asking for things. It's not about changing our circumstances. It's certainly not about changing others, and it's absolutely not about changing God. So you want to take a guess? It's about changing us. See, if our first prayer is to consciously seek and experience, the oneness that we share, the presence of God that is, in us, well, then that tells me that none of us have accomplished being in that space without fail 100% of the time. Not yet. See, when we're seeking out and experience the Spirit, that tells me we want to know Spirit more deeply. We want to merge more closely with those attributes and divine powers that are residing within us. We want to be that presence of God in expression in this world more consistently and in ways that we've not yet done. And when all of that starts to happen, as I believe it has to all of us at different points, different times in our lives, we are changed. Our prayers have changed us. And because they have changed us, the people and the circumstances around us change as well. They change in the way we see them. They change in the way we approach them. They change in the way we interact with them. And they do so now because we are showing up in all of those different spaces with a little bit more love coming forth from us. So it would be incorrect to say that unity doesn't believe that prayer changes things. You just have to remember to keep the sequence in its proper order. Prayer, seeking more of an awareness of God, changes us and in turn changes every aspect of our lives. Prayer changes people, people change things. And therein you also find the underlying teachings of our fifth spiritual principle, that of putting what we believe that includes the power of prayer and the prayer works into action. Now, so far we've looked at the what and the why of prayer, and that brings us to the how. How do we pray? I was into my late 20s before I knew that there were other ways to pray in addition to the way I had been brought up in. My upbringing around prayer was basically the recitation of written prayers, pre-written prayers, many of which had been around for centuries, that were a major component of the Catholic tradition. But then one evening, when my then husband and I knelt down with our two young sons, as we did every night, to recite those prayers before they went to bed, he asked if he could do something different. And then he proceeded to speak words that weren't pre-written. They weren't pre-planned. He just began to offer a prayer as it was coming to him. And there were a lot of pauses and ums and ers and what he later referred to as a real feeling of awkwardness. And I didn't know what to think. I had never experienced anything like this before. It felt very foreign in the moment, and yet at the same time I found myself really admiring him for doing it. And later that evening, he told me that when he had been at a council meeting that he was on at our church earlier that day, the person offering the opening prayer for their gathering used that style, and it had spoken to him. Now, little did I know on that evening how unforeign that style of prayer would become for me years later. So, is there a right method of prayer? Absolutely, there's a right method of prayer. It's the one that feels right for you. And it could be any number of methods. It could be pre-written, more rote style prayers. It could be prayers in the moment that just come from the heart. It could also be methods you may have seen included in the promotions for this service over this past week. Methods involving using, prayer beads or chanting or, foot-stomping music that gets translated into a prayer, or flogging oneself on the back with ropes, sitting on, in the quiet on a beautiful mountaintop. And there's many, many more that we could come up with as well. So I do think it's important for everyone to find a method of prayer that works for them, works for you, and to know that the method is still not the most important aspect of prayer. More important than the method of prayer is the reason for praying. The reason for praying. We already spent some time on the number one reason for that, and that is just lifting us into an experience of our oneness with God and opening to being changed as a result of that. But it goes beyond that, or maybe we can just say that if that's primary or the priority, then there's ripple effects that can come afterwards. And there are ripples that show up as, just a deeper knowing that when we are praying, it is not to a higher power that is somewhere out there and completely separated from us. Or knowing that we can, but it wouldn't be wrong to, but we don't have to beg or barter in our prayers, because now we more firmly believe in the truth that there is access for us to all that God is, and that access is available to us at any time in any situation. Or the ripple that shows up in the words that we choose to hold in our hearts or speak aloud. Words that are now more uplifting and positive in nature and not so iffy or futuristic. Or maybe that ripple is just words that show up that are gratitude in advance for what we have and all that is still yet to come. Or maybe that ripple is a reminder that with a belief in God's presence in us and in every situation, the potential for us is always beyond anything that we can humanly imagine. And all of that is why we also release our prayers when we offer them during our Sunday services. Because when we release the prayers, we're also releasing our attachments to any specific outcomes. To hold tightly to specific outcomes, that would be to place limitations on ourselves or limitations on those that we may be holding in our prayers. And it would also serve to ignore the unlimited nature of spirit. It's also why you may often hear my prayers being bookended. Very often I will open a prayer acknowledging God's presence within myself, within us, and within everything around us. And then I will bookend that at the end by closing with words of gratitude. And often it's gratitude for what we have specifically, or what I have specifically just held in prayer, but then I'll put the words and so much more. Leave that door open for something even better than what we can envision right now. But all this talk about words, even the words we choose are not of utmost importance. When I've taught prayer classes or facilitated prayer chaplain trainings over the years, one common concern that comes forth from folks who are gathered in those settings is a fear that they're going to say the wrong words in their prayers, that their prayers won't be correct. And in time, I've found that they tend to find their comfort levels. But in the interim, what I encourage them to do is to not be afraid of the silence, to not be afraid that there's no words, to instead just embrace that stillness. Silence can be one of the most powerful experiences of prayer, whether you are in prayer again for yourself or for someone else. We discover things in the silence because we're listening. There's nothing else coming to us. It's a wonderful thing to have happen sometimes, because then we can discover what's been waiting for us. It's a place that exists beyond words. It exists beyond our thoughts. It is a place of stillness, and it's a wonderful place to rest in the presence of God. And it doesn't have to be that place of Eden on top of a beautiful mountain. It certainly can be, of course, but it doesn't have to be. Prayerful silence can be experienced anywhere and at any time. So experience it the next time you're waiting for the traffic light to turn green. Experience it the next time you're just walking up and down the aisles of your grocery store. Or maybe just take time for it in your first waking moments of a new day. Or perhaps take time for some thoughts of gratitude at day's end. Again, just know that the stillness, the silence, is always available. Every experience of prayer, no matter when or for how long, no matter what method we choose, whether it's filled with words or no words at all, every prayer builds upon the last one. Our prayers have a cumulative effect in our lives. They continue to change us. They continue to transform us into those spirit-centered, as our mission statement in this church holds for us, spirit-centered beings that we were meant to be. And so with all this being said, I hope that you can understand why I say now that it's so important to remember that we must pray. We must pray. And so I'd like us to do that now as a way of closing today's lesson. I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson that Richard Rohr is the director of the Center for Action and Contemplation. And it's his style of contemplative prayer that I'd like us to try today. Now, he refers to contemplative prayer in this way. He says it is a form of unveiling because it reveals what is going on beneath the polished and busy surfaces of our minds, our hearts, and our bodies. He adds that when we finally get still enough, contemplation can live in us in pure, open moments right here, right now. And if the words come out of that empty, contemplative place, we can trust that we really mean them, that we really mean the words we say. So what I'm going to do is lead us into a time of silence, maybe 30, 45 seconds or so. And in doing so, I invite you to allow to come into your mind, come into your heart, something that's on your mind, something that you would like to surround in prayer right now. And then after that time in the silence, I'll come back in and to share a little bit of some guiding words whose intention is going to be to just begin to plant that beginning seed of unveiling the words that your heart wants to share, words that you will trust and know to be true for you and true for whatever it is that you are holding in this particular prayer. Okay? And so if there's anything you want to do right now in the moment to just relax in a different way or settle into whatever space you're in right now, whatever works for you, let's just maybe just take a breath or two to just bring our focus right here, right now. And as we prepare to step into the sacred silence, we do acknowledge God's presence within us and everywhere around us. We invite that presence to come clearly right now into our awareness as we enter into the silent space in which it dwells, as we enter into our oneness with God. This moment, right here, right now, is enough. This moment is fullness. If it is not here, right now, it does not exist. If I don't know God now, how would I know God later? In this space of contemplative prayer, I am present to the moment, present to the intention which I'm holding in my heart. I'm free of personal needs. There are no human meanings being formed, no interpretations of any kind taking place. In their place, I ask for an unveiling to begin. What does this person, circumstance, situation, experience, what does it have to say to me? What does it have to teach me? What is the message? What is the gift that is in this for me? How is God in this experience? Where is God in this experience? Unveil the truth that is mine to learn, to trust, and to know. And now I offer these closing words that come from Richard Rohr. Loving God, you fill all things with a fullness and hope that we can never comprehend. Thank you for leading us into a time where more of reality is being unveiled for us all to see. Help us to have the courage to awaken to greater truth, greater humility, and greater care for one another. Knowing, good God, that you are hearing us better than we are speaking, we offer all these prayers in all the holy names of God. And so it is. Amen. And God bless you.